So far, there was a few old school Facebook moderator admins. They're like, this guy's been online since 1999 with another account in 2007 and a third 2011. His fourth account in 2020. Well, we can't touch his 1999 account, but we can shut down the next three, and they did. And they didn't send a warning, and they didn't send a memo. It's just like no more input. You can't add anything. It's not my device problem. It's the few web page, and they're gonna have to be seen by Opal Group and Opal Group and of the Facebooks on the Facebooks for Facebooks, and I'm stuck with YouTube's again. No, I can't post videos, I can't post pictures, I can't even post types or click likes on any of the Facebook's account. Thankfully, I was using YouTube's the first year I moved in to the apartment here. So now I can keep up the rhetoric, and it's boy, it's a mouthful. It's a mouthful. You'd have to read the whole script to what it was about, and I can give some clinchers, some highlights, and it's just a 16th mile trek from Fort Trumbull Nuclear Submersible Parking Space and the inspiration to the Pentagon, where the president visits every May since 1775. It's the land of George Washington and Benjamin Franklin. Yeah, sure, and antiques, and there's plenty of 1600s woods, land of the turkey sort of treescapes, but also it's high-tech technologies like it's NASA of the Northeast. And what we do is build nuclear submersibles and nuclear submersible accessories. Now they're marketed as transit vessels, but they're all military grade and have been since, well, there was a surprise and a delay. Manhattan was bombed along with the capital of the great states. So that put a 20-year hold and focused everything back into a triple up on defense, a 300% markup on defense. So we could win the war. And there was a war. There was. So Drew there was born as a public figure in the eyes of the world. Grateful Dead Gerber baby, million billion in fame, but fortune was at a slim to none. And then the disbandment in the Grateful Dead led to fortune continuing as slim to none. You wouldn't even call it fortune; you just call it an average wage, and that pushed up just to with his age 11, and he's still barely he's still growing his skull and growing into a 6 foot tall male. When there was a surprise and a delay, and that shifted his focus into preemptive defense, preparations for military services, federal services, and life-saving civil services. From about December 2001 until about August 2008, when he was given a mandatory off his feet doctor's orders med leave. So what happened is his overthinking brain, his genius brain, and he had brawn too. Like he could punch like a truck. He's built like an oxen, and with mechanical dexterity enough to put body pieces back together in the back of a moving ambulance. He was an expert rifle and through the NRA, and even got the Scout Sniper. Now he was a hell of a shot with a M16 single or three round burst, and you could go ahead and pick up 1,100 pounds on the overhead pole, and cut through reps at 25x4 like butter in a sitting. And currently he weighs 150 pounds at 6 foot tall, and all of his qualifications are still in good standing. They took the man at the top of the brink of the brink of the peak of the climax of manhood, as far as World War III was concerned, and they built him up between 9/11 2001 and somewhere in summer of 2008 as if he was going to get picked up from his house and placed in full-time active duty military service, federal service, or life-saving civil service for his career if the war took a turn. And if John Kerry or Mitt Romney were elected, there's a better chance he would have spent 2 years overseas in the Middle East fighting as a Team USA soldier, and then he would have placed as probably an NYPD anti-terrorism or something similar along those lines, because he had experience with those things. And if those two particular next steps didn't happen, he would have been in the submarine force as an officer in the United States Naval Submarine Force Silent Service. So what did happen instead is he was given a diagnosis of an early onset post-traumatic stress disorder induced aneurysm that led to a schizophrenia side effect. And he's on medicines for the schizophrenia side effects still today. He's had 4,000 8-milligram risperidone pills and 4.5 milligram Vraylar pills to prevent future brain damage, to prevent the schizophrenia aspect from him turning into a comatose or overworking in an unnecessary scenario. Now, he was a genius thinker in quantum mechanics, nuclear engineering, mathematical theories, in computer languages in a very specific sense. His 1994 to 2008 grades pre-K through 12 primary focus was to be a nuclear submersible crew member in a nuclear submersible transit vessels, a submarine officer, an officer on an underwater base. Now, there was one that was back then, and it was going through reservations, Long Island Sound Underwater Research Facility, also known as LISWRF. And so what he's done is he's said on park and dock assignment for Fort Trumbull, the United States Navy extension to the inspiration of the Pentagon, for over 3,500 days in selective service as an on-call nuclear submersible crew member. And that led into a presidential verbal congratulations on military top dog high-end command to his personnel. But as far as his person is concerned, he'd still like to step up and be that Grateful Dead famous born into the eyes of the world. There's a Hollywood album about him, Wake Up to Find Out by the Grateful Dead at 32990 Nassau Coliseum, Uniondale, New York. His pa was on stage next to Jerry Garcia and Brent Midland from about 1986 to 1995. And that whole thing came about when Buddy from New Riders of the Purple Sage, as well as Working Man's Dead and American Beauty, moved to New London City. And he said, so is there anyone around here that's familiar with the Grateful Dead that can show me around? And Drew's dad in 1986 stepped up and said, yeah, I'll show you around New London for a while. How long's your stay? And he said, well, I plan on living here, so maybe the next 10 to 20 years. And that's what happened. Buddy lived in New London for the next 10 to 20 years, and Pa helped him around New London. And Buddy said, hey, do you need any work? And Pa said, yeah. And so he wound up working, coiling speakers and moving wires for the Grateful Dead in a sort of proverbial sense. So Jerry went to Drew's dad one day in the summer of '89 and said, well, so what would you like as far as payment as in favors from the Jerry Garcia? And Drew's dad went that he wanted a secure life. He wanted a boy and a girl, or 2 kids, or 3 kids, to pass down the family lineage from the 1775 Sons of Liberty soldier, gunsmith Jones Carlson, who settled the 10,000 square foot behind Fort Trumbull. And that passed down to Toole Carlson, who fought Union Jack in the Civil War, moving slaves from New London to Canada and back again. That passed down to a Werner Carlson, who built the walls for Electric Boat, built submarine pieces out of Electric Boat, and put up the submarine parking dock at Fort Trumbull. Werner was born in 1870, and he worked in those 3 fields until about 1955, 1956, when he passed away from black lung. He was smithing, drinking whiskey, smoking cigars same time, submarine pieces in Groton at the foundry, but he didn't have a proper respirator. And that was both his choice and faulty respirators from General Dynamics around the Industrial Revolution in the beginning of World War II. So Werner passes down to Silva, and Silva's story is that he rode a submarine that his dad helped build from New London to China and back again during World War II. And on his way back from China, he saw Hiroshima with his naked eyes, and he stayed in the Navy for the next 40 years. They made it back to New London in one piece after the evacuation of Japan for the cease and desist of the Nazi Holocaust and Hitler's Third Reich by the bombing of Japan after the evacuation of Japan, with minimal casualties with Hiroshima, minimal casualties, for Godzilla will arise, Godzilla will arise. And that's a quote slogan from their boat there. So Silva raises Ricky from 1965 until 2003, but Silva also raises Drew from 1990 to 2003, and Silva's primary focus was weapons of mass destruction as far as developmental, modern days, day-to-day, however they are being developed. He's staying up to speed and putting in his 2 cents. He stayed in the Navy for 40 years, but he stayed in the Navy as a field of atomic bombs in 40 years, as well as a submarinist all around. So Silva taught Drew everything he knew to survive in the World War III apocalyptic bombing of the Pentagon and collapse of Manhattan trade. And Drew tries to keep him in his heart, but Drew doesn't have any kids himself. So Jerry was able to secure 2 lives temporarily while he was on Earth. Drew and his baby brother, you should have signed an autograph for, who wound up catching it worse than he did, although Drew caught an aneurysm from EOPTSD from his duty to God and his country and his time in junior service during World War III next to a nuclear submersible parking dock and nuclear submersible accessory manufacturing facility. His little brother caught it much worse than he did in about 2009. So and straying away from the character Ricky and the character Drew's brother, Drew's next step is to attempt to stand up as his former childhood fame has followed him throughout this past 30 years, and he'd like to stand up and figurehead 35 Bank Street at New London City on Bank Street. It's an old Capitol theater where the president watched Mickey Mouse in 1929 when Mickey Mouse was brand new, with military top dog high-end command. Now, 35 Bank Street is still available for sale, as well as the Lighthouse Inn, and he'd like to expand the Carlson State as far as residential too. So besides the band would go ahead and come to New London in an attempt to play for something of a presidential Garcia's extension, similar to Portchester, New York, Capitol Theater, East Coast home of the Grateful Dead, Portchester, New York. It would have been a Garcia's New London, Connecticut, 35 Bank Street, with a Garcia's Hotel, the old Lighthouse Inn, where princes, kings, and queens have stayed visiting America, nowadays previously contested. But 836 Pequot is right next to the Lighthouse Inn. So he'd like to live at 836 Pequot, which is a $2 million house, run Lighthouse Inn as far as figurehead Lighthouse Inn. He'll be the figurehead in a team of managers that run the hotel and run the theater, 35 Bank Street, an old movie palace where the president's seen Mickey Mouse once before. So they'll be booking names called Monet Weir, Keelan Garcia, and Graham Lesh, as well as the oldie moldy surviving members of the Grateful Dead, Mickey Hart, Bill Krusman, Bob Weir, maybe Orteil Burbridge or John Mayer. Those seems like big names too, with Jeff Chimente on the side, say. And who would be in attendance but future presidential administrations. If Biden gets elected, he visits every May, and he can stay as long as he'd like, and he can visit whenever he's like, but he's scheduled by WDC to go to New London every May. It's where George Washington spent a lot of time, as well as Benjamin Franklin. And as well as every president since 1775 or 1776, until through Bush Jr. spent about 1/5 of his term in New London City, and so Drew spent a lot of time with Bush Jr.'s daughter Pierce. Drew spent a lot of time with Keelan Garcia as a prospective husband in the eyes of Jerry, and Drew spent a lot of time being himself, which is a Grateful Dead public figure since 3/29/90. As Brent Midland's last baby boy. He was the last baby boy that Brent Midland really held and took to heart as far as on camera through GDP home movies. And Brent passed away a few months later, and Jerry passed away 5 years later. But the music never stopped, I suppose.